The Mahabharata. Section XL. Astika Parva continued. Saunaka said, O son of Sudha, I desire to know the reason why the illustrious rishi whom thou hast named Jarakara came to be so called on earth. It behoveth thee to tell us the etymology of the name Jarakaru. Sodhi said, Jara is said to mean waste, and Karu implies huge. This rishi's body had been huge, and he gradually reduced it by severe ascetic penances. For the same reason, O Brahmanas, the sister of Vasuki was called Jarakaru. The virtuous Saunaka, when he heard this, smiled and addressing Ugrazravas said, It is even so. Saunaka then said, I have heard all that thou hast before recited. I desire to know how Astika was born. Sodhi, on hearing these words, began to relate according to what was written in the Sastras. Sodhi said, Vasuki, desirous of bestowing his sister upon the rishi Jarakaru, gave the snakes necessary orders. But days went on, yet that wise Muni of rigid vows, deeply engaged in ascetic devotions, did not seek for a wife. That high-souled rishi, engaged in studies and deeply devoted to asceticism, his vital seed under full control, fearlessly wandered over the whole earth and had no wish for a wife. Afterwards, once upon a time, there was a king, O Brahmana, of the name of Parikshit, born in the race of the Kauravas. And, like his great-grandfather Pandu of old, he was of mighty arms, the first of all bearers of bows in battle, and fond of hunting. And the monarch wandered about, hunting deer, and wild boars, and wolves, and buffaloes, and various other kinds of wild animals. One day, having pierced a deer with a sharp arrow and slung his bow on his back, he penetrated into the deep forest, searching for the animal here and there, like the illustrious Rudra himself of old pursuing in the heavens, bow in hand, the deer which was sacrifice, itself turned into that shape, after the piercing. No deer that was pierced by Parikshit had ever escaped in the wood with life. This deer, however wounded as before, fled with speed, as the proximate cause of the king's attainment to heaven. And the deer that Parikshit, that king of men, had pierced was lost to his gaze and drew the monarch far away into the forest. And fatigued and thirsty, he came across a Muni, in the forest, seated in a cow pen and drinking to his fill the froth oozing out of the mouths of calves sucking the milk of their dams. And approaching him hastily, the monarch, hungry and fatigued, and raising his bow, asked that Muni of rigid vows, saying, O Brahmana, I am King Parikshit, the son of Abhimanyu. A deer pierced by me hath been lost. Hast thou seen it? But that Muni, observing then the vow of silence, spoke not unto him a word. And the king in anger thereupon placed upon his shoulder a dead snake, taking it up with the end of his bow. The Muni suffered him to do it without protest. And he spoke not a word, good or bad. And the king, seeing him in that state, cast off his anger and became sorry. And he returned to his capital, but the rishi continued in the same state. The forgiving Muni, knowing that the monarch, who was a tiger amongst kings, was true to the duties of his order, cursed him not, though insulted. That tiger amongst monarchs, that foremost one of Bharata's race, also did not know that the person whom he had so insulted was a virtuous rishi. It was for this that he had so insulted him. That rishi had a son by name Sringin, of tender years, gifted with great energy, deep in ascetic penances, severe in his vows, very wrathful, and difficult to be appeased. At times, he worshipped with great attention and respect his preceptor seated with ease on his seat and ever engaged in the good of creatures. And commanded by his preceptor, he was coming home when, O best of Brahmanas, a companion of his, a rishi's son named Krisa in a playful mood laughingly spoke unto him. And Sringin, wrathful and like unto poison itself, hearing these words in reference to his father, blazed up in rage. And Krisa said, Be not proud, O Sringin, for ascetic as thou art and possessed of energy, thy father bears on his shoulders a dead snake. Henceforth speak not a word to sons of rishis like ourselves who have knowledge of the truth, are deep in ascetic penances, and have attained success. Where is that manliness of thine, those high words of thine? Begotten of pride, when thou must have to behold thy father bearing a dead snake? O best of all the munis, thy father too had done nothing to deserve this treatment, and it is for this that I am particularly sorry. As if the punishment were mine. Section XLI. Astika Parva continued. Soti said, being thus addressed, and hearing that his sire was bearing a dead snake, the powerful Sringin burned with wrath. And looking at Krisa, and speaking softly, he asked him, Pray, why doth my father bear today a dead snake? And Krisa replied, Even as King Parikshit was roving, for purpose of hunting, O dear one, he placed the dead snake on the shoulder of thy sire. And Sringin asked, What wrong was done to that wicked monarch by my father? O Krisa, tell me this, and witness the power of my asceticism. And Krisa answered, King Parikshit, the son of Abhimanyu, while hunting, had wounded a fleet stag with an arrow and chased it alone. And the king lost sight of the animal in that extensive wilderness. Seeing then thy sire, he immediately accosted him. Thy sire was then observing the vow of silence. Oppressed by hunger, thirst, and labor, the prince again and again asked thy sire sitting motionless, about the missing deer. The sage, being under the vow of silence, returned no reply. The king thereupon placed the snake on thy sire's shoulder with the end of his bow. O Sringin, thy sire engaged in devotion is in the same posture still. And the king also hath gone to his capital which is named after the elephant. Soti continued, having heard of a dead snake placed upon his father's shoulders, the son of the rishi, his eyes reddened with anger, blazed up with rage. And possessed by anger, the Pusant rishi then cursed the king, touching water, and overcome with wrath. And Sringin said, That sinful wretch of a monarch who hath placed a dead snake on the shoulders of my lean and old parent, that insulter of Brahmanas and tarnisher of the fame of the Kurus, shall be taken within 7 nights hence to the regions of Yama, death, by the snake Takshaka. The powerful king of serpents, stimulated thereto by the strength of my words. Soti continued, and having thus cursed, the king, from anger, Sringin went to his father, and saw the sage sitting in the cow pen, bearing the dead snake. And seeing his parent in that plight, he was again inflamed with ire. And he shed tears of grief, and addressed his sire, saying, Father, having been informed of this thy disgrace at the hands of that wicked wretch, King Parikshit, I have from anger even cursed him, and that worst of Kurus hath richly deserved my potent curse. 7 days hence, Takshaka, the lord of snakes, shall take the sinful king to the horrible abode of death. And the father said to the enraged son, Child, I am not pleased with thee. Ascetics should not act thus. We live in the domains of that great king. We are protected by him righteously. In all he does, the reigning king should by the like of us forgiven. If thou destroy Dharma, verily Dharma will destroy thee. If the king do not properly protect us, we fare very ill, we cannot perform our religious rites according to our desire. But protected by righteous sovereigns, we attain immense merit, and they are entitled to a share thereof. Therefore, reigning royalty is by all means to be forgiven. And Parikshit, like unto his great-grandsire, protecteth us as a king should protect his subjects. That penance-practicing monarch was fatigued and oppressed with hunger. Ignorant of my vow, of silence, he did this. A kingless country always suffereth from evils. The king punisheth offenders, and fear of punishments conducteth to peace, and people do their duties and perform their rights undisturbed. The king establisheth religion, establisheth the kingdom of heaven. The king protecteth sacrifices from disturbance, and sacrifices to please the gods. The gods cause rain, and rain produceth grains and herbs, which are always useful to man. Manu saith, a ruler of the destinies of men is equal, in dignity, to 10 VEDA studying priests. Fatigued and oppressed with hunger, that penance-practicing prince hath done this through ignorance of my vow. Why then hast thou rashly done this unrighteous action through childishness? O son, in no way doth the king deserve a curse from us. Section XLII. Astika Parva continued. Soti said, and Sringin then replied to his father, saying, whether this be an act of rashness, O father, or an improper act that I have done, whether thou likest it or dislikest it, the words spoken by me shall never be in vain. O father, I tell thee, a curse can never be otherwise. I have never spoken a lie even in jest. And Samika said, dear child, I know that thou art of great prowess, and truthful in speech. Thou hast never spoken falsehood before, so that thy curse shall never be falsified. The son, even when he attaineth to age, should yet be always counseled by the father, so that crowned with good qualities he may acquire great renown. A child as thou art, how much more dost thou stand in need of counsel? Thou art ever engaged in ascetic penances. The wrath of even the illustrious ones possessing the 6 attributes increaseth greatly. O thou foremost of ordinance observing persons, seeing that thou art my son and a minor too, and beholding also thy rashness, I see that I must counsel thee. Live thou, O son, inclined to peace and eating fruits and roots of the forest. Kill this thy anger, and destroy not the fruit of thy ascetic acts in this way. Wrath surely decreaseth the virtue that ascetics acquire with great pains. And then, for those deprived of virtue, the blessed state existeth not. Peacefulness ever giveth success to forgiving ascetics. Therefore, becoming forgiving in thy temper and conquering thy passions, shouldst thou always live. By forgiveness shalt thou obtain worlds that are beyond the reach of Brahman himself. Having adopted peacefulness myself, and with a desire also for doing good as much as lies in my power, I must do something, even must I send to that king, telling him, O monarch, thou hast been cursed by my son of tender years and undeveloped intellect, in wrath, at seeing thy act of disrespect towards myself. Soti continued, and that great ascetic, observer of vows, moved by kindness, sent with proper instructions a disciple of his to King Parikshit. And he sent his disciple Gaurmukha of good manners and engaged also in ascetic penances, instructing him to first inquire about the welfare of the king and then to communicate the real message. And that disciple soon approached that monarch, the head of the Kuru race. And he entered the king's palace, having first sent notice of his arrival through the servant in attendance at the gate. And the twice-born Gaurmukha was duly worshipped by the monarch. And, after resting for a while, he detailed fully to the king, in the presence of his ministers, the words of Samaka, of cruel import, exactly as he had been instructed. And Gaurmukha said, O King of Kings, there is a rishi, Samaka, by name, a virtuous soul, his passions under control, peaceful, and given up to hard ascetic devotions, living in thy dominions. By thee, O tiger among men, was placed on the shoulders of that rishi, observing at present the vow of silence, a dead snake, with the end of thy bow. He himself forgave thee that act, but his son could not. And by the latter hast thou today been cursed, O King of Kings, without the knowledge of his father, to the effect that within 7 nights hence, shall, the snake, Takshaka, cause thy death. And Samaka repeatedly asked his son to save thee, but there is none to falsify his son's curse. And because he hath been unable to pacify his son possessed by anger, therefore have I been sent to thee, O King, for thy good. And that king of the Kuru race, himself engaged in ascetic practices, having heard these cruel words and recollecting his own sinful act, became exceedingly sorry. And the king, learning that foremost of rishis in the forest had been observing the vow of silence, was doubly afflicted with sorrow, and seeing the kindness of the rishi Samaka, and considering his own sinful act towards him, the king became very repentant. And the king, looking like a very god, did not grieve so much for hearing of his death as for having done that act to the rishi. And then the king sent away Gaurmukha, saying, Let the worshipful one, Samaka, be gracious to me. And when Gaurmukha had gone away, the king, in great anxiety, without loss of time, consulted his ministers. And, having consulted them, the king, himself wise in counsels, caused a mansion to be erected upon one solitary column. It was well guarded day and night, and for its protection were placed there physicians and medicines, and brahmanas skilled in mantras all around. And the monarch, protected on all sides, discharged his kingly duties from that place, surrounded by his virtuous ministers. And no one could approach that best of kings there. The heir even could not go there, being prevented from entering. And when the 7th day had arrived, that best of brahmanas, the learned G.V.B, was coming towards the king's residence, desirous of treating the king, after the snake bite. He had heard all that had taken place, viz., that Takshaka, that first of snakes, would send that best of monarchs to the presence of Yama, death. And he thought, I would cure the monarch after he is bit by that first of snakes. By that I may have wealth and may acquire virtue also. But that prince of snakes, Takshaka, in the form of an old Brahmana, saw G.V.B approaching on his way, his heart set upon curing the king. And the prince of snakes then spake unto that bull among Munis, G.V.B, saying, Whither dost thou go with such speed? What, besides, is the business upon which thou art intent? And G.V.B, thus addressed, replied, Takshaka, by his poison, will today burn King Parikshit of the Kuru race, that oppressor of all enemies. I go with speed, O amiable one, to cure, without loss of time, the king of immeasurable prowess, the sole representative of the Pandava race, after he is bit by the same Takshaka like to Agni himself in energy. And Takshaka answered, I am that Takshaka, O Brahmana, who shall burn that lord of the earth. Stop, for thou art unable to cure one bid by me. And Kasyapa rejoined, I am sure that, possessed, that I am of the power of learning, going thither I shall cure that monarch bid by thee. Section Slyeen. Astika Parva continued. Soti said, and Taxhaka, after this, answered, if, indeed, thou art able to cure any creature bitten by me, then, O Kasyapa, revive thou this tree bit by me. O best of Brahmanas, I burn this banyan in thy sight. Try thy best and show me that skill in mantras of which thou hast spoken. And Kasyapa said, if thou art so minded, bite thou then, O king of snakes, this tree. O snake, I shall revive it, though bit by thee. Soti continued, that king of snakes, thus addressed by the illustrious Kasyapa, bit then that banyan tree. And that tree, bit by the illustrious snake, and penetrated by the poison of the serpent, blazed up all around. And having burnt the banyan so, the snake then spake again unto Kasyapa, saying, O first of Brahmanas, try thy best and revive this lord of the forest. Soti continued, the tree was reduced to ashes by the poison of that king of snakes. But taking up those ashes, Kasyapa spoke these words. O king of snakes, behold the power of my knowledge as applied to this lord of the forest. O snake, under thy very nose I shall revive it. And then that best of Brahmanas, the illustrious and learned Kasyapa, revived, by his vidya, that tree which had been reduced to a heap of ashes. And first he created the sprout, then he furnished it with 2 leaves, and then he made the stem, and then the branches, and then the full-grown tree with leaves and all. And Taxhaka, seeing the tree revived by the illustrious Kasyapa, said unto him, it is not wonderful in thee that thou shouldst destroy my poison or that of any one else like myself. O thou whose wealth is asceticism, desirous of what wealth, goest thou thither? The reward thou hopest to have from that best of monarchs, even I will give thee, however difficult it may be to obtain it. Decked with fame as thou art, thy success may be doubtful on that king affected by a Brahmanas curse and whose span of life itself hath been shortened. In that case, this blazing fame of thine that hath overspread the 3 worlds will disappear like the sun when deprived of his splendor, on the occasion of the eclipse. Kasyapa said, I go there for wealth, give it unto me, O snake, so that, taking thy gold, I may return. Taxhaka replied, O best of regenerate ones, even I will give thee more than what thou expectest from that king. Therefore do not go. Soti continued, that best of Brahmanas, Kasyapa, of great prowess and intelligence, hearing those words of Taxhaka, sat in yoga meditation over the king. And that foremost of Munis, viz., Kasyapa, of great prowess and gifted with spiritual knowledge, ascertaining that the period of life of that king of the Pandava race had really run out, returned, receiving from Taxhaka as much wealth as he desired. And upon the illustrious Kasyapa's retracing his steps, Taxhaka at the proper time speedily entered the city of Hastinapura. And on his way he heard that the king was living very cautiously, protected by means of poison neutralizing mantras and medicines. Soti continued, the snake thereupon reflected thus, the monarch must be deceived by me with power of illusion. But what must be the means? Then Taxhaka sent to the king some snakes in the guise of ascetics, taking with them fruits, kusa grass, and water, as presents. And Taxhaka, addressing them, said, Go yet all to the king, on the pretext of pressing business, without any sign of impatience, as if to make the monarch only accept the fruits and flowers and water, that ye shall carry as presents unto him. So he continued, those snakes, thus commanded by Taxhaka, acted accordingly. And they took to the king kusa grass, and water, and fruits. And that foremost of kings, of great prowess, accepted those offerings. And after their business was finished, he said up to them, retire. Then, after those snakes disguised as ascetics had gone away, the king addressed his ministers and friends, saying, eat ye, with me, all these fruits of excellent taste brought by the ascetics. Impelled by fate and the words of the rishi, the king, with his ministers, felt the desire of eating those fruits. The particular fruit, within which Taxhaka had entered, was taken by the king himself for eating. And when he was eating it, there appeared, O Saunika, an ugly insect out of it, of shape scarcely discernible, of eyes black, and of coppery color. And that foremost of kings, taking that insect, addressed his counselors, saying, the sun is setting, today I have no more tear from poison. Therefore, let this insect become Taxhaka and bite me, so that my sinful act may be expiated and the words of the ascetic rendered true. And those counselors also, impelled by fate, approved of that speech. And then the monarch smiled, losing his senses, his hour having come. And he quickly placed that insect on his neck. And as the king was smiling, Taxhaka, who had, in the form of that insect, come out of the fruit that had been offered to the king, coiled himself round the neck of the monarch. And, quickly coiling round the king's neck and uttering a tremendous roar, Taxhaka, that lord of snakes, bit that protector of the earth. Section XLIV. Astika Parva continued. So he said, then the counselors beholding the king in the coils of Taxhaka, became pale with fear and wept in exceeding grief. And hearing the roar of Taxhaka, the ministers all fled. And as they were flying away in great grief, they saw Taxhaka, the king of snakes, that wonderful serpent, coursing through the blue sky like a streak of the hue of the lotus, and looking very much like the vermilion-colored line on a woman's crown dividing the dark masses of her hair in the middle. And the mansion in which the king was living blazed up with Taxhaka's poison. And the king's counselors, on beholding it, fled away in all directions. And the king himself fell down, as if struck by lightning. And when the king was laid low by Taxhaka's poison, his counselors, with the royal priest a holy Brahmana, performed all his last rites. All the citizens, assembling together, made the minor son of the deceased monarch their king. And the people called their new king, that slayer of all enemies, that hero of the Kuru race, by the name of Janamejaya. And that best of monarchs, Janamejaya, though a child, was wise in mind. And with his counselors and priest, the eldest son Parikshita, that bull amongst the Kurus, ruled the kingdom like his heroic great-grandfather Yudhishthira. And the ministers of the youthful monarch, beholding that he could now keep his enemies in check, went to Suvarnavarman, the king of Kasi, and asked him his daughter Vapushtama for a bride. And the king of Kasi, after due inquiries, bestowed with ordained rites, his daughter Vapushtama on that mighty hero of Kuru race. And the latter, receiving his bride, became exceedingly glad. And he gave not his heart at any time to any other woman. And gifted with great energy, he wandered in pursuit of pleasure, with a cheerful heart, on expanses of water and amid woods and flowery fields. And that first of monarchs passed his time in pleasure as Pururavas of old did, on receiving the celestial damsel Urvasi. herself fairest of the fair, the damsel Vapushtamatu, devoted to her lord and celebrated for her beauty, having gained a desirable husband, pleased him by the excess of her affection during the period he spent in the pursuit of pleasure. Section XLV. Astika Parva continued. Meanwhile the great ascetic Jarakaru wandered over the whole earth, making the place where evening fell his home for the night. And gifted with ascetic power, he roamed, practicing various vows difficult to be practiced by the immature, and bathing also in various sacred waters. And the Muni had air alone for his food and was free from desire of worldly enjoyment. And he became daily emaciated and grew lean-fleshed. And one day he saw the spirits of his ancestors, heads down, in a hole, by a cord of Virana roots having only one thread entire. And that even single thread was being gradually eaten away by a large rat dwelling in that hole. And the Pitris in that hole were without food, emaciated, pitiable, and eagerly desirous of salvation. And Jarakaru, approaching the pitiable one, himself in humble guise, asked them, "Who are ye hanging by this cord of Virana roots?" The single weak root that is still left in this cord of Virana roots already eaten away by the rat, dwelling in this hole, is itself being gradually eaten away by the same rat with his sharp teeth. The little that remains of that single thread will soon be cut away. It is clear ye shall then have to fall down into this pit with faces downwards. Seeing you with faces downwards, and overtaken by this great calamity, my pity hath been excited. What good can I do to you? Tell me quickly whether this calamity can be averted by a fourth, a third, or even by the sacrifice of a half of this my asceticism. Oh, relieve yourselves even with the whole of my asceticism. I consent to all this. Do ye as ye please. The Pitris said, "Venerable Brahmacharan, thou desirest to relieve us. But, O foremost of Brahmanas, thou canst not dispel our affliction by thy asceticism. O child, O first of speakers, we too have the fruits of our asceticism. But, O Brahmana, it is for the loss of children that we are falling down into this unholy hell. The grandsire himself hath said that a son is a great merit. As we are about to be cast in this hole, our ideas are no longer clear. Therefore, O child, we know thee not, although thy manhood is well known on earth. Venerable thou art and of good fortune, thou who thus from kindness grievest for us worthy of pity and greatly afflicted. O Brahmana, listen, who we are. We are rishis of the Yayavara sect, of rigid vows. And, O Muni, from loss of children, we have fallen down from a sacred region. Our severe penances have not been destroyed, we have a thread yet. But we have only one thread now. It matters little, however, whether he is or is not. Unfortunate as we are, we have a thread in one, known as Jarakaru. The unfortunate one has gone through the Vedas and their branches and is practicing asceticism alone. He being one with soul under complete control, desires set high, observant of vows, deeply engaged in ascetic penances, and free from greed for the merits or asceticism, we have been reduced to this deplorable state. He hath no wife, no son, no relatives. Therefore, do we hang in this hole, our consciousness lost, like men having none to take care of them. If thou meetest him, oh, tell him, from thy kindness to ourselves, thy Pitris, in sorrow, are hanging with faces downwards in a hole. Holy One, take a wife and beget children. O thou of ascetic wealth! Thou art, O amiable one, the only thread that remaineth in the line of thy ancestors. O Brahmana, the cord of Virana roots that thou seest we are hanging by, is the cord representing our multiplied race. And, O Brahmana, these threads of the cord of Virana roots that thou seest as eaten away, are ourselves who have been eaten up by time. This root thou seest hath been half eaten, and by which we are hanging in this hole is he that hath adopted asceticism alone. The rat that thou beholdest is time, of infinite strength. And he, time, is gradually weakening the wretch. Jarakaru engaged in ascetic penances, tempted by the merits thereof, but wanting in prudence and heart. O excellent one, his asceticism cannot save us. Behold, our roots being torn, cast down from higher regions. Deprived of consciousness by time, we are going downwards like sinful wretches. And upon our going down into this hole with all our relatives, eaten up by time, even he shall sink with us into hell. O child, whether it is asceticism, or sacrifice, or whatever else there be of very holy acts, everything is inferior. These cannot count with the sun. O child, having seen all, speak unto that Jarakaru of ascetic wealth. Thou shouldst tell him in detail everything that thou hast beheld. And, O Brahmana, from thy kindness towards us, thou shouldst tell him all that would induce him to take a wife and beget children amongst his friends, or of our own race. Who art thou, O excellent one, that thus grievest for us all like a friend? We wish to hear who thou art that stayest here. Section XLVI. Astika Parva continued. Soti said. Jarakaru, hearing all this, became excessively dejected. And from sorrow he spoke unto those Pitris in words obstructed by tears. And Jarakaru said, Yea, or even my fathers and grandfathers gone before. Therefore, tell me what I must do for your welfare. I am that sinful son of yours, Jarakaru. Punish me for my sinful deeds, a wretch that I am. The Pitris replied, saying, O son, by good luck hast thou arrived at this spot in course of thy rambles. O Brahmana, why hast thou not taken a wife? Jarakaru said, Yea, Pitris, this desire hath always existed in my heart, that I would, with vital seed drawn up, carry this body to the other world. My mind hath been possessed with the idea that I would not take a wife. But ye grandsires, having seen you hanging like birds, I have diverted my mind from the Brahmacharya mode of life. I will truly do what you like. I will certainly marry, if ever I meet with a maiden of my own name. I shall accept her who, bestowing herself of her own accord, will be as aims unto me, and whom I shall not have to maintain. I shall marry, if I get such a one, otherwise, I shall not. This is the truth, yet, grandsires, and the offspring that will be begot upon her shall be your salvation. And ye Pitris of mine, ye shall live forever in blessedness, and without fear. Soti continued, the Muni, having said so unto the Pitris, wandered over the earth again. And, O Saunika, being old, he obtained no wife. And he grieved much that he was not successful. But directed, as before, by his ancestors, he continued the search. And going into the forest, he wept loudly in great grief. And having gone into the forest, the wise one, moved by the desire of doing good to his ancestors, said, I will ask for a bride, distinctly repeating these words thrice. And he said, whatever creatures are here, mobile and immobile, so whoever there be that are invisible, oh, hear my words. My ancestors, afflicted with grief, have directed me that am engaged in the most severe penances, saying, Marry thou for the acquisition of a son. Oh yeah, being directed by my ancestors, I am roaming in poverty and sorrow, over the wide world for wedding a maiden that I may obtain as alms. Let that creature, amongst those I have addressed, who hath a daughter, bestow on me that am roaming far and near such a bride as is of same name with me, to be bestowed on me as alms, and whom, besides, I shall not maintain, O bestow on me. Then those snakes that had been set upon Jarakaru track, ascertaining his inclination, gave information to Vasuki. And the king of the snakes, hearing their words, took with him that maiden decked with ornaments, and went into the forest unto that rishi. And, O Brahmana, Vasuki, the king of the snakes, having gone there, offered that maiden as alms unto that high-souled rishi. But the rishi did not at once accept her. And the rishi, thinking her not to be of the same name with himself, and seeing that the question of her maintenance also was unsettled, reflected for a few moments, hesitating to accept her. And then, O son of Bhrigu, he asked Vasuki the maiden's name, and also said unto him, I shall not maintain her. Section Slayai. Astika Parva continued. Soti said, Then Vasuki spake unto the Rishi Jarakaru these words, O best of Brahmanas, this maiden is of the same name with thee. She is my sister and hath ascetic merit. I will maintain thy wife, accept her. O thou of ascetic wealth, I shall protect her with all my ability. And, O foremost of the great Munis, she hath been reared by me for thee. And the Rishi replied, This is agreed between us that I shall not maintain her, and she shall not do aught that I do not like. If she do, I leave her. Soti continued, when the snake had promised, saying, I shall maintain my sister, Jarakaru then went to the snake's house. Then that first of mantra-knowing Brahmanas, observing rigid vows, that virtuous and veteran ascetic, took her hand presented to him according to Shastric rites. And, taking his bride with him, adored by the great Rishi, he entered the delightful chamber set apart for him by the king of the snakes. And in that chamber was a bedstead covered with very valuable coverlets. And Jarakaru lived there with his wife. And the excellent Rishi made an agreement with his wife, saying, Nothing must ever be done or said by thee that is against my liking. And in case of thy doing any such thing, I will leave thee and no longer continue to stay in thy house. Bear in mind these words that have been spoken by me. And then the sister of the king of the snakes in great anxiety and grieving exceedingly, spoke unto him, saying, Be it so. And moved by the desire of doing good to her relatives, that damsel, of unsullied reputation, began to attend upon her lord with the wakefulness of a dog, the timidity of a deer, and knowledge of signs possessed by the crow. And one day, after the menstrual period, the sister of Vasuki, having purified herself by a bath according to custom, approached her lord the great Muni, and thereupon she conceived. And the embryo was like unto a flame of fire, possessed of great energy, and resplendent as fire itself. And it grew like the moon in the bright fortnight. And one day, within a short time, Jarakaru of great fame, placing his head on the lap of his wife, slept, looking like one fatigued. And as he was sleeping, the sun entered his chambers in the western mountain and was about to set. And, O Brahmana, as the day was fading, she, the excellent sister of Vasuki, became thoughtful, fearing the loss of her husband's virtue. And she thought, What should I now do? Shall I wake my husband or not? he is exacting and punctilious in his religious duties. How can I act as not to offend him? The alternatives are his anger and the loss of virtue of a virtuous man. The loss of virtue, I ween, is the greater of the two evils. Again, if I wake him, he will be angry. But if twilight passeth away without his prayers being said, he shall certainly sustain loss of virtue. And having resolved at last, the sweet-speeched Jarakaru, the sister of Vasuki, spake softly unto that rishi resplendent with ascetic penances. And lying prostrate like a flame of fire, O thou of great good fortune! Awake, the sun is setting. O thou of rigid vows, O illustrious one, do your evening prayer after purifying yourself with water and uttering the name of Vishnu. The time for the evening sacrifice hath come. Twilight, O Lord, is even now gently covering the western side. The illustrious Jarakaru of great ascetic merit, thus addressed, spake unto his wife these words, his upper lip quivering in anger, O amiable one of the Naga race, thou hast insulted me. I shall no longer abide with thee, but shall go where I came from. O thou of beautiful thighs, I believe in my heart that the sun hath no power to set in the usual time. If I am asleep, an insulted person should never live where he hath met with the insult, far less should I, a virtuous person, or those that are like me. Jarakaru, the sister of Vasuki, thus addressed by her lord, began to quake with terror, and she spake unto him, saying, O Brahmana! I have not waked thee from desire of insult, but I have done it so that thy virtue may not sustain any loss. The rishi Jarakaru, great in ascetic merit, possessed with anger and desirous of forsaking his spouse, thus addressed, spake unto his wife, saying, O thou fair one, never have I spoken a falsehood. Therefore, go I shall. This was also settled between ourselves. O amiable one, I have passed the time happily with thee. And, O fair one, tell thy brother, when I am gone, that I have left thee. And upon my going away, it behoveth thee not to grieve for me. Thus addressed Jarakaru, the fair sister of Vasuki, of faultless features, filled with anxiety and sorrow, having mustered sufficient courage and patience, though her heart was still quaking, then spake unto Rishi Jarakaru. Her words were obstructed with tears and her face was pale with fear. And the palms of her hands were joined together, and her eyes were bathed in tears. And she said, It behoveth thee not to leave me without a fault. Thou treadest over the path of virtue. I too have been in the same path, with heart fixed on the good of my relatives. O best of Brahmanas, the object for which I was bestowed on thee hath not been accomplished yet. Unfortunate that I am, what shall Vasuki say unto me? O excellent one, the offspring desired of by my relatives afflicted by a mother's curse, do not yet appear. The welfare of my relatives dependeth on the acquisition of offspring from thee. And in order that my connection with thee may not be fruitless, O illustrious Brahmana, moved by the desire of doing good to my race do I entreat thee. O excellent one, high-souled thou art, so why shall thou leave me who am faultless? This is what is not just clear to me. Thus addressed, the Muni of great ascetic merit spake unto his wife Jarakaru these words that were proper and suitable to the occasion. And he said, O fortunate one, the being thou hast conceived, even like unto Agni himself is a rishi of soul highly virtuous, and a master of the Vedas and their branches. Having said so, the great rishi, Jarakaru of virtuous soul, went away, his heart firmly fixed on practicing again the severest penances. Section 8. Astika Parva continued. Soti said, O thou of ascetic wealth, soon after her lord had left her, Jarakaru went to her brother. And she told him everything that had happened. And the prince of snakes, hearing the calamitous news, spake unto his miserable sister, himself more miserable still. And he said, Thou knowest, O amiable one, the purpose of thy bestowal, the reason thereof. If, from that union, for the welfare of the snakes, a son be born, then he, possessed of energy, will save us all from the snake sacrifice. The grandsire had said so, of old, in the midst of the gods. O fortunate one, hast thou conceived from thy union with that best of rishis? My heart's desire is that my bestowal of thee on that wise one may not be fruitless. Truly, it is not proper for me to ask thee about this. But from the gravity of the interests I ask thee this. Knowing also the obstinacy of thy lord, ever engaged in severe penances, I shall not follow him, for he may curse me. Tell me in detail all that thy lord, O amiable one, hath done, and extract that terribly afflicting dart that lies implanted for a long time past in my heart. Jarakaru, thus addressed, consoling Vasuki, the king of the snakes, at length replied, saying, Asked by me about offspring, the high-souled and mighty ascetic said, There is, and then he went away. I do not remember him to have ever before speak even in jest aught that is false. Why should he, O king, speak a falsehood on such a serious occasion? He said, Thou shouldst not grieve, O daughter of the snake race, about the intended result of our union. A son shall be born to thee, resplendent as the blazing Sunday. O brother, having said this to me, my husband of ascetic wealth went away. Therefore, let the deep sorrow cherished in thy heart disappear. Soti continued, thus addressed, Vasuki, the king of the snakes, accepted those words of his sister, and in great joy said, Be it so. And the chief of the snakes then adored his sister with his best regards, gift of wealth, and fitting eulogies. Then, O best of Brahmanas, the embryo endued with great splendor, began to develop, like the moon in the heavens in the bright fortnight. And in due time, the sister of the snakes, O Brahmana, gave birth to a son of the splendor of a celestial child, who became the reliever of the fears of his ancestors and maternal relatives. The child grew up there in the house of the king of the snakes. He studied the Vedas and their branches with the ascetic Shyavana, the son of Bhrigu. And though but a boy, his vows were rigid. And he was gifted with great intelligence, and with the several attributes of virtue, knowledge, freedom from the world's indulgences, and saintliness. And the name by which he was known to the world was Astika. And he was known by the name of Astika, whoever is, because his father had gone to the woods, saying, There is, when he was in the womb. Though but a boy, he had great gravity and intelligence. And he was reared with great care in the palace of the snakes. And he was like the illustrious lord of the celestials, Mahadeva of the golden form, the wielder of the trident. And he grew up day by day, the delight of all the snakes. Section XLIX. Astika Parva continued. Saunaka said, Tell me again, in detail all that King Janamejaya had asked his ministers about his father's ascension to heaven. Soti said, O Brahmana, hear all that the king asked his ministers, and all that they said about the death of Parikshit. Janamejaya asked, Know yet all that befell my father? How did that famous king, in time, meet with his death? Hearing from you the incidents of my father's life in detail, I shall ordain something, if it be for the benefit of the world. Otherwise, I shall do nothing. The minister replied, Hear, O monarch, what thou hast asked, viz., an account of thy illustrious father's life, and how also that King of Kings left this world. Thy father was virtuous and high-souled, and always protected his people. Oh, hear, how that high-souled one conducted himself on earth. Like unto an impersonation of virtue and justice, the monarch, cognizant of virtue, virtuously protected the four orders, each engaged in the discharge of their specified duties. Of incomparable prowess, and blessed with fortune, he protected the goddess Earth. There was none who hated him, and he himself hated none. Like unto Prajapati, Brahma, he was equally disposed towards all creatures. O monarch, Brahmanas and Kshatriyas and Vaishyas and Sudras, all engaged contentedly in the practice of their respective duties, were impartially protected by that king. Widows and orphans, the maimed and the poor, he maintained. Of handsome features, he was unto all creatures like a second Soma, cherishing his subjects and keeping them contented, blessed with good fortune, truth-telling, of immense prowess. He was the disciple of Saradwat in the science of arms. And, O Janamejaya, thy father was dear unto Govinda. Of great fame, he was loved by all men. And he was born in the womb of Uttara when the Kuru race was almost extinct. And, therefore, the mighty son of Abhimanyu came to be called Parikshit, born in an extinct line. Well versed in the interpretation of treatises on the duties of kings, he was gifted with every virtue, with passions under complete control, intelligent, possessing a retentive memory, the practicer of all virtues, the conqueror of his six passions of powerful mind, surpassing all, and fully acquainted with the science of morality and political science. The father had ruled over these subjects for 60 years. And he then died, mourned by all his subjects. And, after him, O first of men, thou hast acquired this hereditary kingdom of the Kurus for the last 1,000 years. Thou wast installed while a child, and art thus protecting every creature. Janamejaya said, There hath not been born in our race a king who hath not sought the good of his subjects or been loved by them. Behold, especially the conduct of my grandsires ever engaged in great achievements. How did my father, blessed with many virtues, meet with his death? Describe everything to me as it happened. I am desirous of hearing it from you. Soti continued, thus directed by the monarch, those counselors, ever solicitous of the good of the king, told him everything exactly as it had occurred. And the counselors said, O king, that father of thine, that protector of the whole earth, that foremost of all persons obedient to the scriptures, became addicted to the sports of the field, even as Pandu of mighty arms, that foremost of all bearers of the bow in battle. He made over to us all the affairs of state, from the most trivial to the most important. One day, going into the forest, he pierced a deer with an arrow. And having pierced it, he followed it quickly on foot into the deep woods, armed with sword and quiver. He could not, however, come upon the lost deer. 60 years of age and decrepit, he was soon fatigued and became hungry. He then saw in the deep woods a high-souled rishi. The rishi was then observing the vow of silence. The king asked him about the deer, but, though asked, he made no reply. At last the king, already tired with exertion and hunger, suddenly became angry with that rishi. sitting motionless like a piece of wood in observance of his vow of silence. Indeed, the king knew not that he was a Muni observing the vow of silence. Swayed by anger, thy father insulted him. O excellent one of the Bharata race, the king, thy father taking up from the ground with the end of his bow a dead snake placed it on the shoulders of that Muni of pure soul. But the Muni spake not a word good or bad and was without anger. He continued in the same posture, bearing the dead snake. Section L. Astika Parva continued. Soti continued, the ministers said, that King of Kings then, spent with hunger and exertion, and having placed the snake upon the shoulders of that Muni, came back to his capital. The Muni had a son, born of a cow, of the name of Sringin. He was widely known, possessed of great prowess and energy, and very wrathful. Going, every day, to his preceptor, he was in the habit of worshipping him. Commanded by him, Sringin was returning home, when he heard from a friend of his about the insult of his father by thy parent. And, O tiger among kings, he heard that his father, without having committed any fault, was bearing, motionless like a statue, upon his shoulders a dead snake placed thereon. O king, the Rishi insulted by thy father was severe in ascetic penances, the foremost of Munis, the controller of passions, pure, and ever engaged in wonderful acts. His soul was enlightened with ascetic penances, and his organs and their functions were under complete control. His practices and his speech were both very nice. He was contented and without avarice. He was without meanness of any kind and without envy. He was old and used to observe the vow of silence. And he was the refuge whom all creatures might seek in distress. Such was the Rishi insulted by thy father. The son, however, of that Rishi, in wrath, cursed thy father. Though young in years, the powerful one was old in ascetic splendor. Speedily touching water, he spake, burning as it were with spiritual energy and rage, these words in allusion to thy father, behold the power of my asceticism. Directed by my words, the snake Takshaka of powerful energy and virulent poison shall, within 7 nights hence, burn, with his poison the wretch that hath placed the dead snake upon my unoffending father. And having said this, he went to where his father was. And seeing his father he told him of his curse. The tiger among rishis thereupon sent to thy father a disciple of his, named Gaurmukha, of amiable manners and possessed of every virtue. And having rested a while, after arrival at court, he told the king everything, saying in the words of his master, thou hast been cursed, O king, by my son. Takshaka shall burn thee with his poison. Therefore, O king, be careful. O Janamejaya, hearing those terrible words, thy father took every precaution against the powerful snake Takshaka. And when the 7th day had arrived, a Brahmana Rishi, named Kasyapa, desired to come to the monarch. But the snake Takshaka saw Kasyapa. And the prince of snakes spake unto Kasyapa without loss of time, saying, where dost thou go so quickly, and what is the business on which thou goest? Kasyapa replied, saying, O Brahmana, I am going whither King Parikshit, that best of the Kurus, is. He shall today be burnt by the poison of the snake Takshaka. I go there quickly in order to cure him, in fact, in order that, protected by me, the snake may not bite him to death. Takshaka answered, saying, why dost thou seek to revive the king? To be bitten by me? I am that Takshaka. O Brahmana, behold the wonderful power of my poison. Thou art incapable of reviving that monarch when bit by me. So saying, Taxhaka, then and there, bit a lord of the forest, a banyan tree. And the banyan, as soon as it was bit by the snake, was converted into ashes. But Kasyapa, O king, revived it. Taxhaka thereupon tempted him, saying, Tell me thy desire. And Kasyapa, too, thus addressed, spake again unto Taxhaka, saying, I go there from desire of wealth. And Taxhaka, thus addressed, then spake unto the high-souled Kasyapa in these soft words, O sinless one, take from me more wealth than what thou expectest from that monarch, and go back. And Kasyapa, that foremost of men, thus addressed by the snake, and receiving from him as much wealth as he desired, wended his way back. And Kasyapa going back, Taxhaka, approaching in disguise, blasted, with the fire of his poison, thy virtuous father, the first of kings, then staying in his mansion with all precautions. And after that, thou wast, O tiger among men, been installed, on the throne. And, O best of monarchs, we have thus told thee all that we have seen and heard, cruel though the account is. And hearing all about the discomfiture of thy royal father, and of the insult to the Rishyodhanka, decide thou that which should follow. Soti continued, King Janamejaya, that chastiser of enemies, then spake up to all his ministers. And he said, When did ye learn all that happened? Upon that, Banyan reduced to ashes by Taxhaka, and which, wonderful as it is, was afterwards revived by Kasyapa. Assuredly, my father could not have died, for the poison could have been neutralized by Kasyapa with his mantras. That worst of snakes, of sinful soul, thought within his mind that if Kasyapa resuscitated the king bit by him, he, Taxhaka, would be an object of ridicule in the world owing to the neutralization of his poison. Assuredly, having thought so, he pacified the Brahmana. I have devised a way, however, of inflicting punishment upon him. I like to know, however, what ye saw or heard, what happened in the deep solitude of the forest. Viz. The words of Taxhaka and the speeches of Kasyapa. Having known it, I shall devise the means of exterminating the snake race. The ministers said, Hear, O monarch of him who told us before of the meeting between that foremost Brahmana and that prince of snakes in the woods. A certain person, O monarch, had climbed up that tree containing some dry branches with the object of breaking them for sacrificial fuel. He was not perceived either by the snake or by the Brahmana. And, O king, that man was reduced to ashes along with the tree itself. And, O king of kings, he was revived with the tree by the power of the Brahmana. That man, a Brahmana's menial, having come to us, represented fully everything as it happened between Taxhaka and the Brahmana. Thus have we told thee, O king, all that we have seen and heard. And having heard it, O tiger among kings, ordain that which should follow. Soti continued, King Janamejaya, having listened to the words of his ministers, was sorely afflicted with grief, and began to weep. And the monarch began to squeeze his hands. And the lotus-eyed king began to breathe a long and hot breath, shed tears, and shrieked aloud. And, possessed with grief and sorrow, and shedding copious tears, and touching water according to the form, the monarch spake. And reflecting for a moment, as if settling something in his mind, the angry monarch, addressing all ministers, said these words. I have heard your account of my father's ascension to heaven. know yet. Now what my fixed resolve is. I think no time must be lost in avenging this injury upon the wretch Taxhaka that killed my father. He burnt my father, making Sring in only a secondary cause. From Mali Goodnighty alone he made Kasyapa return. If that Brahmana had arrived, my father assuredly would have lived. What would he have lost if the king had revived by the grace of Kasyapa and the precautionary measures of his ministers? From ignorance of the effects of my wrath, he prevented Kasyapa, that excellent of Brahmanas whom he could not defeat, from coming to my father with the desire of reviving him. The act of aggression is great on the part of the wretch Taxhaka, who gave wealth unto that Brahmana in order that he might not revive the king. I must now avenge myself on my father's enemy to please myself, the Rishiudhanka, and you all. Section Li. Astika Parva continued. Sodhi said, King Janamejaya having said so, his ministers expressed their approbation. And the monarch then expressed his determination to perform a snake sacrifice. And that lord of the earth, that tiger of the Bharata race, the son of Parikshit, then called his priest and Ritviks. And accomplished in speech, he spake unto them these words relating to the accomplishment of his great task. I must avenge myself on the wretch Taxhaka who killed my father. Tell me what I must do. Do you know any act by which I may cast into the blazing fire the snake Taxhaka with his relatives? I desire to burn that wretch even as he burnt, of yore, by the fire of his poison, my father. The chief priest answered, There is, O king, a great sacrifice for thee, devised by the gods themselves. It is known as the snake sacrifice, and is read of in the Puranas. O king, thou alone canst accomplish it, and no one else. Men versed in the Puranas have told us, there is such a sacrifice. Sodhi continued, thus addressed, the king, O excellent one, thought Taxhaka to be already burnt and thrown into the blazing mouth of Agni, the eater of the sacrificial butter. The king then said unto those Brahmanas versed in mantras, I shall make preparations for that sacrifice. Tell me the things that are necessary. And the kings Ritviks, O excellent Brahmana, versed in the Vedas and acquainted with the rites of that sacrifice, measured, according to the scriptures, the land for the sacrificial platform. And the platform was decked with valuable articles and with Brahmanas. And it was full of precious things and paddy. And the Ritvika sat upon it at ease. And after the sacrificial platform had been thus constructed according to rule and as desired, they installed the king at the snake sacrifice for the attainment of its object. And before the commencement of the snake sacrifice that was to come, there occurred this very important incident foreboding obstruction to the sacrifice. For when the sacrificial platform was being constructed, a professional builder of great intelligence and well versed in the knowledge of laying foundations, a Sudha by caste, well acquainted with the Puranas, said, the soil upon which and the time at which the measurement for the sacrificial platform has been made, indicate that this sacrifice will not be completed, a Brahmana becoming the reason thereof. Hearing this, the king, before his installation, gave orders to his gatekeepers not to admit anybody without his knowledge. Section Li. Astika Parva continued. Sodhi said, the snake sacrifice then commenced according to due form. And the sacrificial priests, competent in their respective duties, according to the ordinance, clad in black garments and their eyes red from contact with smoke, poured clarified butter into the blazing fire, uttering the appropriate mantras, and causing the hearts of all the snakes to tremble with fear, they poured clarified butter into the mouth of Agni, uttering the names of the snakes. And the snakes thereupon began to fall into the blazing fire, benumbed and piteously calling upon one another, and swollen and breathing hard, and twining each other with their heads and tails, they came in large numbers and fell into the fire. The white, the black, the blue, the old, and the young all fell alike into the fire, uttering various cries. Those measuring a krasa, and those measuring a yojana, and those of the measure of a gokarna, fell continuously with great violence into that first of all fires. And hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of snakes, deprived of all control over their limbs, perished on that occasion. And amongst those that perished, there were some that were like horses, other like trunks of elephants, and others of huge bodies and strength like maddened elephants of various colors and virulent poison, terrible and looking like maces furnished with iron spikes, of great strength, ever inclined to bite. The snakes, afflicted with their mother's curse, fell into the fire. Section LIII. Astika Parva continued. Saunaka asked, what great rishis became the Ritviks at the snake sacrifice of the wise king Janamejaya of the Pandava line? Who also became the Sadduceus in that terrible snake sacrifice, so frightful to the snakes, and begetting such sorrow in them? It behoveth thee to describe all these in detail, so that, O son of Sudha, we may know who were acquainted with the rituals of the snake sacrifice. Sodhi replied, I will recite the names of those wise ones who became the monarchs Ritviks and Sadduceus. The Brahmana Chandabhargava became the Hatri in that sacrifice. He was of great reputation, and was born in the race of Chyavana and was the foremost of those acquainted with the Vedas. The learned old Brahmana, Kotsa, became the Ajatri, the chanter of the Vedic hymns. Jaimini became the Brahmana, and Sarngarva and Pingla the Advaryas, Vyasa with his son and disciples, and Uddalaka, Pramataka, Swatakatu, Pingla, Asita, Devala, Narada, Parvata, Atreya, Kundajathara, the Brahmana Kaligata, Vatsya, old Srutas Ravas ever engaged in japa and the study of the Vedas. Kohala Devasarman, Maudgalya, Samasarava, and many other Brahmanas who had got through the Vedas became the Sadduceus at that sacrifice of the son of Parikshit. When the Ritviks in that snake sacrifice began to pour clarified butter into the fire, terrible snakes, striking fear into every creature, began to fall into it. And the fat and the marrow of the snakes thus falling into the fire began to flow in rivers. And the atmosphere was filled with an insufferable stench owing to the incessant burning of the snakes. And incessant also were the cries of the snakes fallen into the fire and those in the air about to fall into it. Meanwhile, Taxhaka, that prince of snakes, as soon as he heard that King Janamejaya was engaged in the sacrifice, went to the palace of Purandara, Indra. And that best of snakes, having represented all that had taken place, sought in terror the protection of Indra after having acknowledged his fault. And Indra, gratified, told him, O prince of snakes, O Taxhaka, here thou hast no fear from that snake sacrifice. The grandsire was pacified by me for thy sake. Therefore, thou hast no fear. Let this fear of thy heart be allayed. Sodhi continued, thus encouraged by him, that best of snakes began to dwell in Indra's abode in joy and happiness. But Vasuki, seeing that the snakes were incessantly falling into the fire and that his family was reduced to only a few, became exceedingly sorry. And the king of the snakes was afflicted with great grief, and his heart was about to break. And summoning his sister, he spake unto her, saying, O amiable one, my limbs are burning and I no longer see the points of the heavens. I am about to fall down from loss of consciousness. My mind is turning, my sight is falling and my heart is breaking. Benumbed, I may fall today into that blazing fire. This sacrifice of the son of Parikshit is for the extermination of our race. It is evident I also shall have to go to the abode of the king of the dead. The time is come, O my sister, on account of which thou wert bestowed by me on Jarakaru to protect us with our relatives. O best of the women of the snake race, Astika will put an end to the sacrifice that is going on. The grandsire told me this of old. Therefore, O child, solicit thy dear son who is fully conversant with the Vedas and regarded even by the old, for the protection of myself and also of those dependent on me. Section Live. Astika Parva continued. Soti said, then the snake dame Jarakaru, calling her own son, told him the following words according to the directions of Vasuki, the king of the snakes. O son, the time is come for the accomplishment of that object for which I was bestowed on thy father by my brother. Therefore, do thou that which should be done. Astika asked, why wert thou, O mother, bestowed on my father by my uncle? Tell me all truly so that on hearing it, I may do what is proper. Then Jarakaru, the sister of the king of the snakes, herself unmoved by the general distress, and even desirous of the welfare of her relatives, said unto him, O son, it is said that the mother of all the snakes is Kadraug. Know thou why she cursed in anger her sons? Addressing the snakes, she said, as ye have refused to falsely represent Uchchesravas, the prince of horses, for bringing about Vinata's bondage according to the wager, therefore, shall he whose charioteer is Vaya burn you all in Janamjaya's sacrifice. And perishing in that sacrifice, ye shall go to the region of the unredeemed spirits. The grandsire of all the worlds spake unto her while uttering this curse, be it so, and thus approved of her speech. Vasuki, having heard that curse and then the words of the grandsire, sought the protection of the gods, O child, on the occasion when the Amrita was being churned for, and the gods, their object, fulfilled, for they had obtained the excellent Amrita, with Vasuki ahead, approached the grandsire. And all the gods, with King Vasuki, sought to incline him who was born of the lotus to be propitious, so that the curse might be made abortive. And the gods said, O Lord, Vasuki, the king of the snakes, is sorry on account of his relatives. How may his mother's curse prove abortive? Brahman thereupon replied, saying, Jarakaru will take unto himself a wife of the name of Jarakaru, the Brahmana born of her will relieve the snakes. Vasuki, the best of snakes, hearing those words, bestowed me, O thou of godlike looks, on thy high-souled father some time before the commencement of the sacrifice. And from that marriage thou art born of me. That time has come. It behoveth thee to protect us from this danger. It behoveth thee to protect my brother and myself from the fire, so that the object, viz., our relief, for which I was bestowed on thy wise father, may not be unfulfilled. What dost thou think, O son? Soti continued, thus addressed, Astika said unto his mother, yes, I will. And he then addressed the afflicted Vasuki, and as if infusing life into him, said, O Vasuki, thou best of snakes, thou great being. Truly do I say, I shall relieve thee from that curse. Be easy, O snake. There is no fear any longer. I shall strive earnestly so that good may come. Nobody hath ever said that my speech, even in jest, hath proved false. Hence on serious occasions like this, I need not say anything more. O uncle, going thither today I shall gratify, with words mixed with blessings, the monarch Janamejaya installed at the sacrifice, so that, O excellent one, the sacrifice may stop. O high-minded one, O king of the snakes, believe all that I say. Believe me, my resolve can never be unfulfilled. And Vasuki then said, O Astika, my head swims and my heart breaks. I cannot discern the points of the earth, as I am afflicted with a mother's curse. And Astika said, Thou best of snakes, it behoveth thee not to grieve any longer. I shall dispel this fear of thine from the blazing fire. This terrible punishment, capable of burning like the fire at the end of the yuga, I shall extinguish. Nurse not thy fear any longer. Soti continued, then that best of Brahmanas, Astika, quelling the terrible fear of the Vasuki's heart, and taking it, as it were, on himself, wended, for the relief of the king of the snakes, with speed to Janamejaya's sacrifice blessed with every merit. And Astika having gone thither, beheld the excellent sacrificial compound with numerous sadasias on it, whose splendor was like unto that of the sun or Agni. But that best of Brahmanas was refused admittance by the doorkeepers. And the mighty ascetic gratified them, being desirous of entering the sacrificial compound. And that best of Brahmanas, that foremost of all virtuous men, having entered the excellent sacrificial compound, began to adore the king of infinite achievements, Ritviks, the Sadasias, and also the sacred fire. Section LV. Astika Parva continued. Astika said, Soma and Varuna and Prajapti performed sacrifices of old in Prayaga. But thy sacrifice, O foremost one of Bharata's race, O son of Parikshit, is not inferior to any of those. Let those dear unto us be blessed. Sakra performed 100 sacrifices. But this sacrifice of thine, O foremost one of Bharata's race, O son of Parikshit, is fully equal to 10,000 sacrifices of Sakra. Let those dear unto us be blessed. Like the sacrifice of Yama, of Harimedha, or of King Rantideva, is the sacrifice of thine, O foremost one of Bharata's race, O son of Parikshit. Let those dear unto us be blessed. Like the sacrifice of Maya, of King Sasavandu, or of King Vice-Ravana, is this sacrifice of thine, O foremost one of Bharata's race, O son of Satyavati, in which he himself was the chief priest, is this sacrifice of Enrajya, of Ajamata, of the son of Dasarata, is this sacrifice of thine, O foremost one of Bharata's race, O son of Parikshit. Let those dear unto us be blessed. Like the sacrifice of King Yudhishthira, the son of a god and belonging to Ajamata race, heard of, even, in the heavens, is this sacrifice of thine. O foremost one of Bharata's race, O son of Parikshit, let those dear unto us be blessed. Like the sacrifice of Krishna, Dwaipayana, the son of Satyavati, in which he himself was the chief priest, is this sacrifice of thine, O foremost one of Bharata's race, O son of Parikshit. Let those dear unto us be blessed. These, Ritviks and Sadasias, that are here engaged in making thy sacrifice, like unto that of the slayer of Britra, are of splendor equal to that of the sun. There now remains nothing for them to know, and gifts made to them become inexhaustible, in merit. It is my conviction that there is no Ritvik in all the worlds who is equal to thy Ritvik, Dwaipayana. His disciples, becoming Ritviks, competent for their duties, travel over the earth. The high-souled bearer of libation, viz., Agni, called also Vibhavasu and Chitrabhanu, having gold for his vital seed and having his path, marked by black smoke, blazing up with flames inclined to the right, beareth these thy libations of clarified butter to the gods. In this world of men there is no other monarch equal to thee in the protection of subjects. I am ever well pleased with thy abstinence. Indeed, thou art either Varuna, or Yama, the god of justice. Like Sakra himself, thunderbolt in hand, thou art, in this world, the protector of all creatures. In this earth there is no man so great as thou, and no monarch who is thy equal in sacrifice. Thou art like Katwanga, Nabhaga, and Dilapa. In prowess thou art like Yayati and Man the three. In splendor equal to the sun, and of excellent vows, thou art, O monarch, like Bhishma. Like Valmiki thou art of energy concealed. Like Vasishtha thou hast controlled thy wrath. Like Indra is thy lordship. Thy splendor also shines like that of Narayana. Like Yama art thou, conversant with the dispensation of justice. Thou art like Krishna, adorned with every virtue. Thou art the home of the good fortune that belongs to the Vasus. Thou art also the refuge of the sacrifices. In strength thou art equal to Dambadbhava. Like Rama, the son of Jamadagna. Thou art conversant with the scriptures and arms. In energy thou art equal to Urva and Trita. Thou inspirest terror by thy looks like Bharata. Soti said, Astika, having thus adored them, gratified them all, viz. The king, the Sadduceus, the Ritviks, and the sacrificial fire. And King Janamejaya, beholding the signs and indications manifested all around, addressed them as follows. Section LVI. Astika Parva continued. Janamejaya said, though this one is but a boy, he speaks yet like a wise old man. He is not a boy but one wise and old. I desire to bestow on him a boon. Therefore, ye Brahmanas, give me the necessary permission. The Sadduceus said, a Brahmana, though a boy, deserves the respect of kings. The learned ones do more so. This boy deserves every desire of his being fulfilled by thee, but not before Taxhaka comes with speed. Soti continued, the king, being inclined to grant the Brahmana a boon, said, ask thou a boon. The Khatri, however, being rather displeased, said, Taxhaka hath not come as yet into the sacrifice. Janamejaya replied, exert yet to the best of your might, so that this sacrifice of mine may attain completion, and Taxhaka also may soon come. Here. He is my enemy. The Ritviks replied, as the scriptures declare unto us, and as the fire also saith, O monarch, it seems that Taxhaka is now staying in the abode of Indra, afflicted with fear. Soti continued, the illustrious Sutan named Lohitaksha also, conversant with the Puranas, had said so before. Asked by the king on the present occasion, he again told the monarch, Sire, it is even so as the Brahmanas have said, knowing the Puranas. I say, O monarch, that Indra hath granted him this boon, saying, dwell with me in concealment, and Agni shall not burn thee. Soti continued, hearing this, the king installed in the sacrifice became very sorry and urged the Khatri to do his duty. And as the Khatri, with mantras, began to pour clarified butter into the fire, Indra himself appeared on the scene. And the illustrious one came in his car, adorned by all the gods standing around, followed by masses of clouds, celestial singers, and the several bevies of celestial dancing girls. And Taxhaka, anxious with fear, hid himself in the upper garment of Indra and was not visible. Then the king in his anger again said unto his mantra knowing Brahmanas these words, bent upon the destruction of Takshaka, if the snake Takshaka be in the abode of Indra, cast him into the fire with Indra himself. Soti continued, urged thus by the king Janamejaya about Takshaka, the Hatri poured libations, naming that snake then staying there. And even as the libations were poured, Takshaka, with Purandara himself, anxious and afflicted, became visible in a moment in the skies. Then Purandara, seeing that sacrifice, became much alarmed, and quickly casting Takshaka off, went back to his own abode. After Indra had gone away, Takshaka, the prince of snakes, insensible with fear, was by virtue of the mantras brought near enough the flames of the sacrificial fire. The Ritviks then said, O King of Kings, the sacrifice of thine is being performed duly. It behoveth thee, O Lord, to grant a boon now to this first of Brahmanas. Janamejaya then said, Thou immeasurable one of such handsome and childlike features, I desire to grant thee a worthy boon. Therefore, ask thou that which thou desirest in thy heart. I promise thee, that I will grant it even if it be ungrantable. The Ritviks said, O monarch, behold, Takshaka is soon coming under thy control. His terrible cries, and loud roar is being heard. Assuredly, the snake hath been forsaken by the wielder of thunder. His body being disabled by your mantras, he is falling from heaven. Even now, rolling in the skies, and deprived of consciousness, the prince of snakes cometh, breathing loudly. Soti continued, while Takshaka, the prince of snakes was about to fall into the sacrificial fire, during those few moments Astika spoke as follows, O Janamejaya, if thou wouldst grant me a boon, let this sacrifice of thine come to an end and let no more snakes fall into the fire. O Brahmana, the son of Parikshit, being thus addressed by Astika, became exceedingly sorry and replied unto Astika thus, O illustrious one, gold, silver, kine, whatever other possessions thou desirest I shall give unto thee. But let not my sacrifice come to an end. Astika thereupon replied, Gold, silver or kine, I do not ask of thee, O monarch. But let thy sacrifice be ended so that my maternal relations be relieved. Soti continued, the son of Parikshit, being thus addressed by Astika, repeatedly said this unto that foremost of speakers, best of the Brahmanas, ask some other boon. Oh, blessed be thou. But, O thou of Bhrigu's race, he did not beg any other boon. Then all the Sadducees, conversant with the Vedas, told the king in one voice, let the Brahmana receive his boon. Section LVII. Astika Parva continued. Saunaka said, O son of Asuta, I desire to hear the names of all those snakes that fell into the fire of the snake sacrifice. Soti replied, many thousands and tens of thousands and billions of snakes fell into the fire. O most excellent Brahmana, so great is the number that I am unable to count them all. So far, however, as I remember, here the names I mention of the principal snakes cast into the fire. Here first the names of the principal ones of Vasuki's race alone. Of color blue, red, and white, of terrible form and huge body and deadly poison. Helpless and miserable and afflicted with their mother's curse, they fell into the sacrificial fire like libations of butter. Kodasa, Manasa, Purna, Kala, Palahalmaka, Pichchala, Kanapat, Kakra, Kalavega, Prakalana, Hiranyavahua, Karana, Kakshaka, Kalatantaka. These Snakes born of Vasuki, fell into the fire. And, O Brahmana, numerous other snakes well born, and of terrible form and great strength, were burnt in the blazing fire. I shall now mention those born in the race of Takshaka. Hear thou their names. Pukchandaka, Mandilaka, Pandasektri, Ravnaka, Uchakaka, Karava, Banjas, Vilwachas, Virohana, Salai, Salakara, Muka, Sukumara, Prapana, Mudgara, and Suroman, Suroman and Mahahanu. These snakes born of Takshaka fell into the fire. And Paravata, Parijata, Pandara, Harina, Krisa, Vihanga, Sarabha, Mita, Pramoda, Salarhatapana. These born in the race of Airavata fell into the fire. Now, hear, O best of Brahmanas, the names of the snakes I mention born in the race of Kauravya, Arika, Kundalavani, Vaniskunda, Kumarika, Vahuka, Sringavara, Dhartaka, Pratara, and Astaka. They're born in the race of Kauravya fell into the fire. Now hear the names I mention, in order, of those snakes endued with the speed of the wind and with virulent poison. Born in the race of Dhritarashtra, Sankhyakarna, Pitharika, Kuthara, Sukana, and Shechaka, Purnangata, Purnamuka, Prahasa, Sakuni, Dari, Amatha, Kumathaka, Sushana, Vyaya, Bhairava, Mundavidanga, Paisanga, Udraparika, Rishabha, Vejavat, Pandarika, Raktanga, Sarvasaranga, Sumrida, Patha, and Vaisaka, Varahaka, Viranaka, Suchitra, Chitravgika, Parasra, Tharunaka, Maniskunda, and Aruni. O Brahmana, thus I have recited the names of the principal snakes known widely for their achievements. I have not been able to name all, the number being countless. The sons of these snakes, the sons of those sons that were burnt having fallen into the fire, I am unable to mention. They are so many. Some of 3 heads, some of 7, others of 10, of poison. Like unto the fire at the end of the yuga, and terrible in form. They were burnt by thousands. Many others, of huge bodies, of great speed, tall as mountain summits, of the length of a yama, of a yojana, and of 2 yojanas, capable of assuming at will any form and of mastering at will any degree of strength, of poison like unto blazing fire, afflicted by the curse of a mother, were burnt in that great sacrifice. Section Layin. Astika Parva, continued. Sodhi said, listen now to another very wonderful incident in connection with Astika. When King Janamejaya was about to gratify Astika by granting the boon, the snake, Takshaka, thrown off Indra's hands, remained in mid-air without actually falling. King Janamejaya thereupon became curious. For Takshaka, afflicted with fear, did not at once fall into the fire, although libations were poured in proper form into the blazing sacrificial Agni in his name. Saunaka said, was it, O Sutta, that the mantras of those wise Brahmanas were not potent, since Takshaka did not fall into the fire? Sodhi replied, unto the unconscious Takshaka, that best of snakes. After he had been cast off Indra's hands, Astika had thrice said, stay, stay, stay. And he succeeded in staying in the skies, with afflicted heart, like a person somehow staying between the welkin and the earth. The king then, on being repeatedly urged by his Sadduceus, said, let it be done as Astika hath said. Let the sacrifice be ended, let the snakes be safe, let this Astika also be gratified, O Sutta, thy words also be true. When the boon was granted to Astika, plaudits expressive of joy rang through the air. Thus the sacrifice of the son of Parikshit that king of the Pandava race came to an end. The king Janamejaya of the Bharata race was himself pleased, and on the Ritviks with the Sadduceus. And on all who had come there, the king bestowed money by hundreds and thousands. And unto Sudha Lohitaksha conversant with the rules of building and foundations, who had at the commencement said that a Brahmana would be the cause of the interruption of the snake sacrifice, the king gave much wealth. The king, of uncommon kindness, also gave him various things, with food and wearing apparel, according to his desire, and became very much pleased. Then he concluded his sacrifice according to the prescribed rites, and after treating him with every respect, the king in joy sent home the wise Astika exceedingly gratified, for he had attained his object. And the king said unto him, Thou must come again to become a Sadasya in my great horse sacrifice. And Astika said, Yes, and then returned home in great joy, having achieved his great end after gratifying the monarch, and returning in joy to his uncle and mother, and touching their feet, he recounted to them everything as it had happened. Soti continued, hearing all he had said, the snakes that had come thither became very much delighted, and their fears were allayed. They were much pleased with Astika and asked him to solicit a boon, saying, O learned one, what good shall we do unto thee? We have been very much gratified, having been all saved by thee. What shall we accomplish for thee, O child? Astika said, Let those Brahmanas, and other men, who shall, in the morning or in the evening, cheerfully and with attention, read the sacred account of this my act, have no fear from any of you. And the snakes in joy thereupon said, O nephew, in the nature of thy boon, let it be exactly as thou sayest. That which thou askest we all shall cheerfully do, O nephew. And those also that call to mind Astika, Ardaman and Sunita, in the day or in the night, shall have no fear of snakes. He again shall have no fear of snakes who will say, I call to mind the famous Astika born of Jarakaru, that Astika who saved the snakes from the snake sacrifice. Therefore, ye snakes of great good fortune, it behoveth you not to bite me, but go ye away, blessed be ye, or go away. Thou snake of virulent poison, and remember the words of Astika after the snake sacrifice of Janamejaya. That snake who does not cease from biting, after hearing such mention of Astika, shall have his hood divided 100-fold like the fruit of Sinsa tree. Soti continued, that first of Brahmanas, thus addressed by the foremost of the chief snakes assembled together, was very much gratified. And the high-souled one then set his heart upon going away. And that best of Brahmanas, having saved the snakes from the snake sacrifice, ascended to heaven when his time came, leaving sons and grandsons behind him. Thus have I recited to thee this history of Astika exactly as it happened. Indeed, the recitation of this history dispelleth all fear of snakes. Soti continued, O Brahmanas, O foremost one of Bhrigu's race, as thy ancestor Pramati had cheerfully narrated unto his inquiring son Ruru, and as I had heard it, thus have I recited this blessed history, from the beginning, of the learned Astika. And, O Brahmana, O oppressor of all enemies, having heard this holy history of Astika that increaseth virtue, and which thou hadst asked me about after hearing the story of the Dundubha, let thy ardent curiosity be satisfied.